Hello everyone, this is the 5th video in my series of reviews of the Famicom Wars franchise, also known as Advance Wars and Game Boy Wars. At this point I must recommend, if you have not watched the other videos up to this point, to at least start with my review of Advance Wars 1, since I'm covering Advance Wars 2 and the games following it from here on out. Advance Wars 2 came out in 2003 everywhere except Japan, where it was, again, delayed and released in a double pack with Advance Wars 1 in 2004. You'd be forgiven for thinking Advance Wars 2 is merely a rehash of the original with new maps, because the core gameplay isn't shaken up in any big ways, and there's only one new unit. Even the CO themes from the previous game are completely reused. Advance Wars 2 does bring something a little different to the table though. The biggest new feature is the Super CO power, a second level above regular CO powers. Like with regular CO powers, the developers got really creative. Superpowers do not simply build upon what the regular powers did, there's usually something big and new in addition. Anti-Super restores 5 HP to all units, a pretty big amount. Kanbei becomes completely invincible instead of just kind of invincible. Sonya gained the ability to attack first during the enemy's turn with her superpower. And Sammy, oh Lord Sammy, can capture any building in one turn, including the HQ. It takes longer to get to the Super CO powers, and there's incentive to not always wait for them since some regular CO powers might be just enough in an urgent situation. Other additions to the game include missile silos, a special weapon that can be fired at enemy units by a foot soldier. They do a lot of damage but do not contribute to the power bar. Either side can use them, so if a map has one, there's reason enough to both get there first and apply it to the right place at the right time. Pipes are a strange addition. No unit can cross them, not even air units, which at the very least finally lets you make maps smaller than 30 by 20, indirectly at least. Now if only we had more than 3 slots to save our custom maps to. That would be nice. The other new terrain features are unfortunately exclusive to the campaign, and this is where the trouble with Advance Wars 2 starts. Advance Wars 2 pretty much has a worse campaign overall compared to the first, and maybe the original was simply a tough act to follow since it was well designed and was rewarding to beat. Advance Wars 2 starts by tying its tutorial into campaign mode instead of having a separate game mode for it, which means anyone who's already played Advance Wars has to sit through easy tutorial missions before getting to the good part. Campaign mode itself is very different. This time around, instead of Orange Star going against everyone else, the player takes command of everyone else against Black Hole, whose army boasts most of the new COs. This, by itself, means that you will be facing the same enemy COs over and over while your characters change swiftly. It's different, but it unfortunately means you won't be beating people on their home turf. It just feels kinda less fun. None of the Black Hole COs are of much interest in terms of gameplay either. They're honestly kind of bland. I think the most interesting of the new COs is the Terrain Specialist, and she's useless in air combat because air units can't get any terrain bonuses. Good job. The plot this time around is also less interesting. Advance Wars 1 didn't have the greatest plot altogether, but the writing was enjoyable and the characters play off each other well. The biggest twist was Black Hole's existence in the first place. In Advance Wars 2, they pull off a full-scale invasion, and that's really it. No clones, no fighting the other countries. Mission progression just has you clearing 2 stages out of a set of 3 in order to advance through each country. 34 missions are in the campaign. You only need to complete 24 of them. Unlockable missions do exist, but let me tell you how that works. The sole new unit is the Neo Tank, basically a bigger and better tank, which is boring on its own. The Neo Tank is usable at all times outside of campaign mode, but inside campaign mode you must unlock a secret mission by capturing a specific city in a specific map. The game hints at which map has the required city, but you almost never know where the city is. It's simply not worth it to unlock the mission and get Neo Tanks because, aside from never really needing the unit in a mode that usually makes you work with what the game gives you, Neo Tanks have to be unlocked on a by-country basis, meaning that if you unlock them with Orange Star, they can use the Neo Tank, but Blue Moon, Green Earth, and Yellow Comet can't until you unlock it again for them, and when you do unlock it, most of the respective countries' campaign will be over by then anyways. As for individual level design, there are two serious issues prevalent throughout much of the campaign. First, destructible objects are a new kind of objective that gets used way too often. These include cracks in the pipelines, static cannons, big and small, a laser that fires every turn and wastes your time with its horrendously long animation, and the death ray, seen only in the final map of the game. It's way too easy to drop a bomber or an indirect unit onto the objective you're destroying. The second issue is that several maps make you waste your time moving around in circles for hours for no good reason. See, I don't really think giant maps with hordes of enemy units make for good gameplay simply because they take ages. Some maps have you controlling more than one army too. You're taking twice as many turns, and as far as the mostly unchanged ranking system goes, only one of the armies you control counts towards the rankings, which leads to rather silly situations. In Drake's Dilemma, Drake can sneak his battleships behind the black cannons here and destroy them. Canvey has an army here, but it's useless because Drake is the one who has to destroy any units for the power ranking, and only his units count for technique. The real dilemma is how much of a freebie mission this is. While we're on the subject of Green Earth, To the Rescue tasks Eagle with destroying 4 of those lasers that fire every stinking turn. And if Orange Star gets murdered in this mission, you get to do it again. The hard mode this time around doesn't improve things that much. On the one hand, the tutorial missions are retooled into better levels, but the rest of the game follows the usual paradigm of add a couple of extra units, bomber spam optional. War Room mode returns. Unfortunately, it carried over all 20 of the original maps in addition to 10 new ones. Due to the slightly improved AI, the giant maps from Super Famicom Wars become much more painful to complete. Most of the new maps are pretty good at least, except for Lost Basin, which takes forever, and Risky Vale, which is the hardest challenge in Advance Wars 2 entirely because there aren't any enemy HQs on this map. That's fair, isn't it? CO balance this time around is also questionable. Due to Sammy's ability to capture an HQ in one turn with her super CO power, she's a mainstay in War Room, kind of like Max was, who was nerfed in this game. Most of the imbalances from a multiplayer perspective come from the new COs introduced. Colin is a Blue Moon rich boy who has to pay only 80% of a unit's costs, allowing him to get to stronger units much quicker, in combination with a CO power that multiplies his bank account, and a super that turns riches into firepower. Sensei is even worse. His powers give him free foot soldiers on every city he controls, letting him spam as many of them as he wants, creating excellent walls for indirect units. Hachi, the shopkeeper, may be a bonus CO, but he's worth mentioning. His super lets him build from cities instead of just factories, at half the price, no less. You will most certainly want to come to an agreement with your opponent on who not to pick if you play this in multiplayer. Regardless of its debatable status as an inferior rehash, Advance Wars 2 is still a decent game on its own. A lot of complaints I put out boiled down to comparisons to the first game, which I still hold as having the best campaign mode in the whole series. Advance Wars 2 is worth a play even if you've beaten another game in the series. Just be ready to expect a slower campaign mode and much more widely varying War Room difficulty. Next up, the advance in Advance Wars loses all meaning as the series hits the Nintendo DS. Hopefully that's all that will lose meaning.